Welcome to Talk Clarity. I'm your life coach and podcast host, Clarity. I'm excited to introduce to you our new guest, Mark Birch, who is a retired law enforcement officer of 20 years, who has served his life in working child crimes, has also had some experience for the FBI, and has started some nonprofits and is committed to creating change and is passionate about helping the community. Mark, we're extremely excited to have you on the show, and we're very excited to hear about your experience, what you're doing now, and the things that you're trying to accomplish throughout the community, as well as dive into some topics surrounding human trafficking and child abuse. Mark, welcome to the show.
Appreciate this.
We're so happy to have you here and appreciate your time. If you would just like to share a little bit of background on you, what you've done, and what you're currently trying to do.
I'm retired law enforcement, spent 13 years out of my 20 years in investigations. Last 5 was particular to and specific to child crimes here in Utah. Was a forensic child interviewer and have interviewed, can't tell you how many kids about abuse in their life. So I have a varied background. I was born in Hawaii, grew up on a Native American reservation in Arizona, lived in Canada for a while, lived in Seattle and Nevada and California, came here to go to school, received my undergraduate degree from Utah State University and then a master's degree from Anaheim University.
Appreciate you going into that with us. I'd like you to take us back into the beginning when you first got into law enforcement. If you could describe what life was like, first of all, as a law enforcement officer.
So yeah, I mean, things have changed over the years, definitely. Yes, there's this kind of defund the police kind of movement and whatnot. When I became a police officer, people were much more, respectful, and didn't really give you much hassle as a law enforcement officer. Part of my first couple of years in law enforcement, I was the school resource officer for the high school and the junior high in the area. And my prior career, I worked as a counselor in youth corrections prior to that in the lockdown facility. So, part of my goal of becoming a police officer was to try to make a difference in the lives of young people and try to catch them a little earlier than by the time they were locked up with me in youth corrections. So,
appreciate you going into that with us. I'd like you to take us back into the beginning when you first got into law enforcement. If you could describe what life was like, first of all, as a law enforcement officer.
So in law enforcement, you start out in patrol and you write tickets and you do accidents and you respond to cases, all kinds of cases. And that's really what the first few years were for me and for most law enforcement. You start out in patrol, and it wasn't too much further on that I ended up in investigations.
How did that transpire?
It was a small department at first, so my experience was different than those from larger police agencies. So for me, there was an opening in investigations, and I tested for it. The first time I didn't get it, the second time when I did. And in the agency that I worked for, you would pretty much be on call a week at a time, and anything within that week you would take. So deaths, burglaries, sex crimes, those type of things. And so I had a broad experience in my investigative time. It wasn't until later on in my career and the agency became larger that I could do specific sex crimes, child crimes investigations. The first sex crime I did turned out to be somebody that I dealt with later. And I was a brand new investigator on that case. And it was just a young kid. He was probably 12 or 13 years old, but he was perpetrating on all the younger kids in his neighborhood. I think there were probably 10 or 11 victims by the time we were done. So
That's heartbreaking to hear. Do you know the background on him, maybe?
came from a really good family. I spent a lot of time with mom and trying to get him help. It wasn't until later that we found out that he had serious issues, even after being locked up and going to a program down in Utah County called Bird's Eye, where youth offenders, sex offenders go. And he disclosed further victims there. So
Wow.
it was interesting. But I came to work as a witness in another case later on after he got out of youth correction.
You mentioned that, later when he was finally in a facility, some things started to transpire. Was it mental illness that started to come out, or what, just so you can help us understand? Because you're talking about a good kid, or I would say coming from a good family, supposedly this good kid, as I would say the image was. What happened? What was he dealing with?
No, I'm not sure. It's my perception that he came from a good family. It was a middle class, maybe upper middle class. And, there was no disclosure to me of any mental illness or anything like that. So, and as law enforcement, we're not privy to the counseling notes and things like that. We just investigate the crimes that are involved. So.
Wow. Okay. So, kind of moving forward into your next cases that you work, but maybe just start with even just adolescents and the youth right now. What other cases did you work? What did you see? What did you experience?
So, just continuing with that young man, I later became a witness in a case against him for attempted kidnapping at a apartment complex in Provo for a very good friend of mine in California sent his daughter there, and it turned out that that same kid was this young lady's home teacher in the LDS religion, and he had planned to kidnap her and use her as a sex slave. And so I didn't know it was him until after the fact. But the family called me and said, "Hey, can you check out my daughter?" And this is what she told me, that he, as her home teacher, lured her to the laundry room in the basement of the apartment complex with the guise of having some artwork in a bin down in the laundry room underneath the laundry table. And when she got down there, he says, "Yeah, the artwork's in here." And she kind of felt like it was odd. And then she opened the bin, which is probably, 3 feet by 2 feet or something like that, a rubber bin. And she then woke up and he was stuffing a towel in her mouth, and she had a handcuff on her left hand. And how she was able to get out of that was she bit his fingers as he was stuffing the towel in her mouth. And she had been tased twice, and she, by biting his hand, it took him out of his plan. And it was probably like April 4th or 5th. And he told her, "Oh, it's just an April Fool's joke, just an April Fool's joke." And he took the handcuff off of her hand, and then she took the towel out of her mouth. She went home. She didn't call the police, and she just talked to her family. And so they called me, and I went and interviewed her, and he is now out of prison. He was arrested for attempted kidnapping and assault. So,
How much time did he serve on that case with her?
I think it was probably 8 or 9 years.
Not enough time.
Not enough time. And here's the thing: is this is the same boy that I worked with all the other sexual things he was doing. So in his mind, he never was cured by any of the counseling he received or any of the time he spent in juvie. He just became almost smarter about it, and then was able to get into this apartment complex that's primarily for BYU students, and befriended this young girl that I have strong friend ties to, and then he turns out to be this guy that tried to kidnap her as a sex slave, and it's just scary that there are people like that out there, and that even after all his counseling and whatnot, he was still criminal-minded to the point where he actually attempted to kidnap her and assaulted her with a taser. So,
Poor girl. How old was she?
I think it was her first year at BYU, so maybe 18 or 19 years old.
She's so young.
Yeah.
So we're talking about somebody just barely an adult.
Mm-hmm.
We're diving into this happening. This really could happen to anybody younger or old.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Wow.
So, and that's the thing, right? She's a mom, has several kids, but is definitely and will continue to be traumatized by that experience.
Forever affected. But you said she's a mom now, so she's married, she has kids, she's kind of moved on with her, I wouldn't say moved on with her life, but she's built a life for herself.
Yes.
That's inspiring that anybody can come out on the other end of something like that and be a mom, be a wife, and actually have a life, because it is so traumatizing when these things happen to people and you don't ever get over this. But I think that there are some amazing people out there that can come out on the other side and create some beautiful things with their life, and move. I wouldn't say move on, but move forward in their life. Have children, have families. Are you still in contact with her?
I am.
And how is she today?
She's a little paranoid of ever. She still lives in that area and is paranoid about bumping into him somewhere. The man that tried to kidnap her,
And he's been released how long ago?
I'm not quite sure, but it's been at least 2 years now.
I appreciate you just going into that with us. Can you give us another snapshot into some other cases that you worked, maybe some child cases and what transpired through those?
Sure. So I've had a lot of experiences with child abuse and child sex abuse, and it ranges from the maltreatment of children. I had a case where the kids would eat the raw hamburger out of the refrigerator. That's all that was really in the refrigerator, and they would pick at it with their fingers and eat raw hamburger. And so we, with DCFS, took those children away from the mom. Pretty filthy, nothing much in there. There was a mattress on the ground where she slept. And so, I don't know, maybe the kids, that's where they slept as well, or on the ground, on the carpet. So that's a maltreatment type of case, those type of things happen. Kids are, um, I've worked cases where the parents for a preteen or teenager would take everything out of the room and leave a mattress for them. And in the end, there were no charges, because as long as they're being sheltered and fed and everything, there were no charges as far as the county attorney was involved. So,
Why not?
just because they meet the basic standards of care, which is shelter, and they feed their kids. And, at this day and age, that's probably considered emotional abuse, maybe. But so the law is not specific about you have to have a bed off the ground or posters on the wall or pictures on the wall. It's just you have to give the care that's required.
What about, you were talking about, that one case with the raw meat in the fridge and these kids just picking at it with their fingers? That's not considered?
No, she was charged. So
Okay.
in the other situation where it's a teenager and the parents are just disciplining, they fed her breakfast and dinner, and she went to school and had lunch at school. So it's not the maltreatment of a child where she was not fed, but she just had everything in her room taken out and just left with a mattress and blankets, and she was grounded, I guess. And so I did investigate that and presented it for charges, but the county attorney wouldn't take it, just based on the basics of necessities were being met. So,
Mark, what other type of cases did you work?
So definitely a lot of child sex abuse. A lot of that came at about the same time that smartphones became available. My partner and I that used to do a lot of sex crimes investigations. Whenever we would have young people committing sex acts on young people, we'd always ask how they got into it. And for the most part, it was from their phones and viewing pornography on their phones. Sometimes it was pornography they found at their house, but for the most part, it was pornography that they had found on their phones at school. The other thing is that if they were perpetrated on, sometimes they will continue the actions that were perpetrated on them and perpetrate on other kids the same actions. So it seems to me like there are so many cases anymore, so much of our kids being sexualized so young, and once that started, it's hard to stop that.